Vipsania Julia, known as Agrippina, was in the province of Panonia when word came of her sister Julila's exile to the island of Tremorus in 8 AD. The news of Julila's arrest came fast on the heels of her brother Postumus's exile to the island of Planasia earlier that same year. Having lost both her older brothers to mysterious deaths, Lucius in 2 AD and Gaius a year and a half later, Agrippina now stood alone among the offspring of Marcus Agrippa and Julia Caesarius Filia. Agrippina's grandfather, Caesar Augustus, had arranged for her to marry Germanicus, the grandson of Augustus's Claudian wife, Livia Drusilla, as a means of drawing the young man closer to the Julian side of the family. After all, Germanicus now stood in the direct line of military succession to Rome's mighty legions. Caesar Augustus had adopted his Claudian stepson, Tiberius, as his primary heir, but only after forcing Tiberius to adopt Germanicus, his nephew. Though Germanicus was a Claudian by birth, he was also the grandson of Augustus's sister, Octavia Thurina. The blood of his grandmother connected Germanicus to Julius Caesar in equal measure with Agrippina's own Julian blood. Following his adoption by Tiberius, Agrippina's husband now laid claim to the Julian name as well, as Germanicus Julius Caesar. In 6 AD, Agrippina departed Rome with Germanicus, ordered to Panonia to assist Tiberius, who was engaged in ending a large-scale rebellion which had broken out. Tiberius had originally undertaken the continued war against Germania's Marco-Manni tribe, and had begun his march through Gaul. Marcus Valerius Messala Messallinus, the governor of Illyricum, was ordered to gather auxiliary troops from the local Dicitiate and Dalmatian tribes, and meet Tiberius en route. However, when the auxiliary troops gathered, they rebelled under a Dicitiate tribal chieftain named Bato, and easily defeated the first Roman forces sent against them by Messallinus. Only 5 days into his march through Gaul, Tiberius was forced to turn his legions around and make haste for Illyricum. But the forces under Bato quickly swelled. Southern Pannonia's largest tribe, known as the Bruci, joined the rebellion under a chieftain who also had the name Bato. This alliance of the two Batos quickly brought the numbers of the Panonian revolt to approximately 200,000 between infantry and cavalry. Used often as Roman auxiliary forces, Pannonia's rebels understood Roman battle tactics and how they conducted war, making them a greater challenge to Rome's legions. The Panonians executed their campaign. The two Batos divided their forces into 3. One force was sent to invade Italy through the Panonian town of Nauportus. A second force was sent to invade the neighbouring Roman province of Macedonia, and the third was to remain in Panonia, where, across the province and along the Adriatic coastline, they savagely slaughtered Roman citizens, who were helpless to defend themselves. In Rome, panic ensued. Agrippina's grandfather, Caesar Augustus, announced that unless drastic measures were taken, the city might undergo invasion in as little as 10 days. He placed Agrippina's father-in-law, Tiberius, in charge of the Panonian War, and ordered a general levy of new recruits from across Italy. Caesar Augustus also recalled to service those veterans who had already retired, and commanded Rome's richest families to provide and arm, proportionate to their wealth, freedmen for the legions. By 7 AD, these legions, made up of new conscripts, retired veterans, and freedmen who were given no choice, were ready for transport to Panonia under the command of Agrippina's husband, Germanicus. Pregnant with her 3rd child, Agrippina chose to gather her children, Gaius, born in 5 AD, and Nero, born in 6, and travel alongside her husband. To remain in Rome was to risk becoming the next symbol around whom the populists might rally. They had once loved Agrippina's mother and her older brothers, all 3 of whom were now conveniently removed from Rome's political equation. Then they turned their attention to her youngest brother, Postumus Agrippa, who soon found himself relocated to the town of Sorrentum on the Bay of Naples, at approximately the same time as Julila's husband, Paulus Aemilius Lepidus, was executed for treason. Who was next, if not Agrippina's husband or sons? Despite his Claudian birth, Germanicus was the son of Nero Claudius Drusus, a popular war hero whom many believed intended to restore the Republic, had he not died prematurely. And her own sons, Gaius and Nero, were the great-grandchildren of Augustus. For Agrippina it was better to leave Rome and travel with her husband's legions than to risk finding herself the recipient of an island, all her own. Agrippina's grandfather had dispatched this newly created force of legions under the command of Germanicus as a criticism of Tiberius's inaction. Panonia was too quiet, and Augustus grew suspicious. He began to suspect that Tiberius was deliberately prolonging the war in Panonia so that he might ensure his power by remaining under arms. And so, Germanicus was sent to disabuse Tiberius of any such notion. However, when Germanicus and Agrippina arrived in the province, they discovered that Tiberius, much to the contrary, had been extremely active. He was successfully conducting a quiet war of attrition against Panonia's rebels. The two Batos had refused to meet Tiberius's legions in pitched battle, choosing instead to employ cowardly guerrilla warfare tactics of hit and run, all while maintaining a strong defensive position high in the Claudian mountains, where they were surrounded by natural fortifications. And so Tiberius undertook a scorched earth campaign designed to wear the rebelling forces down, as well as turning the region's starving men and women against the so-called rebels. Marcus Plautius Silvanus, the governor of Moesia, was ordered to bring legions into Panonia to assist Tiberius. Silvanus had previously dispatched auxiliary cavalry, commanded by Rumetalces and his brother Rasciparis, two petty kings from Thrace, and now brought his legions to join Tiberius Germanicus and his cavalry. The two Batos then surrounded the combined armies of the Romans and attacked. During the most brutal part of the battle, the Thracian cavalry was routed by the Panonians, which caused Rome's remaining allied cavalry to flee in terror. Convinced that the Romans, who were suffering heavy casualties, were all but defeated, the two Batos took a detachment of their forces and went to ambush another general, Aulus Caecina Severus, reported to be arriving in Panonia with even more troops. Then the Romans rallied. Despite the huge number of losses and fleeing allies, the Roman legions under Tiberius and Germanicus began to gain ground, turning what was nearly a fatal defeat into a last-minute victory and chasing what remained of the rebel forces back to their stronghold in the Claudian mountains. Near the Voltian marshes, Aulus Caecina Severus, who had only a single legion at half capacity, was ambushed by approximately 20,000 men, commanded by the two Batos. Despite his vastly inferior numbers, Caecina Severus successfully repelled the attack and was eventually able to bring his beleaguered forces to join the greater armies of Tiberius and Germanicus. But now, Tiberius faced a new problem. Not since the time of the civil wars had so many legions been gathered in a single location and under a single commander. Aware of the optics such a large army posed to a paranoid stepfather with a suspicious mind, Tiberius immediately escorted two of his legions back into the province of Dalmatia. When he returned, he ordered his generals to spread out with their individual legions. Throughout the 7 to 8 AD winter, the legions were commanded to continue ravaging the countryside as part of Tiberius's scorched earth campaign. Only Agrippina's husband, Germanicus, found any glory during that winter. As he burned fields and local villages to the ground, the Mazzai tribe attempted to unite and offer him resistance. Against the Mazzai, Germanicus earned his very first personal victory. By the spring of 8 AD, the citizens of Illyricum, Dalmatia and Panonia were starving and disease-ridden. Tiberius's war of attrition had reaped its intended fruit. The people were ready to surrender to the Romans, but the rebels, still protected in the Claudian mountains, refused to capitulate and continued to drag on their guerrilla tactics. But inside their stronghold, the relationship of the two Batos was beginning to deteriorate. Whether Agrippina stayed in her husband's military camp, marching from location to location alongside his legions, or whether she remained safely ensconced in the villa of some wealthy Panonian ally, is not known. However, by the end of the 8 AD year, the war in Panonia seemed to finally wind down, except for a few holdouts. Agrippina had given birth to a third son in 7 AD, named Tiberius, and a fourth son, named Drusus, early in 8 AD. Her sister, Julilla, and brother, Postumus, had both been permanently exiled from Rome, forced to live out the rest of their days isolated, except for their guards. That Agrippina did not find herself sharing the fate of her mother and siblings, all of whom had gotten involved in the political wars waged at home between the populist and the conservative factions, was likely due to her absence from the city altogether. Only by remaining constantly at the side of her husband and protector, Germanicus Julius Caesar, and by giving him children whose paternity was beyond question, might Agrippina hope to outmaneuver the unseen forces that had contributed to the decimation of her entire family.